The seven lost gods are seven ancient, powerful beings who were either defeated by or submitted to Bane, the god of tyranny, strife, and hatred. The Dead Three, the title given to Bane, Baal, and Merkel, then absorbed their powers during their ambitious quest for godhood. Before I explain what exactly the seven lost gods are, I need to explain which lost gods I'm talking about, as there are actually two different sets of beings referred to as the seven lost gods in the Forgotten Realms. There are the seven lost gods of Westgate, which were the main seven gods worshipped in the city of Westgate. Then in 927 DR, temples were banned from the city, and they were then referred to by Westhavians as the seven lost gods. I presume because they had lost the ability to worship them in temples, they were now lost to the people. However, those are not the beings we are discussing. We are going to talk about the seven lost gods of Antiquity, the seven beings that submitted to Bane, the Black Lord, in the -300s DR. Those beings are Borem of the Lake of Boiling Mud, Camnod the Unseen, Edranka of the Smouldering Haze, Hargut of the Grey Pestilence, Maram of the Great Spear, Torath of the Obsidian Vault, and Tyranthraxus the Flamesd One. Although I listed Hargut of the Grey Pestilence as one, most sages and historical records actually list Haask, voice of Hargut, as one of the seven lost gods instead, Haask being the spellcaster who summoned Hargut, and then eventually was fused to him. Only 5 of the 7 lost gods are known to sages by name, as Edranka and Torath's names and histories were lost to time. Although their histories are lost to the sages of the Forgotten Realms, they are known to the historians of Earth, specifically Eric Boyd, so don't worry, I will talk about them. Now, before I continue with the video, I do want to give a disclaimer on one of these sources I used, but if you don't care, just use the timestamps to skip to the description section. Anyways, one of my main sources on these 7 beings is the DM's Guild book Lord of the End of Everything by Eric Boyd. Now, since this is a DM's Guild product, it is technically not official canon. However, the writer Eric Boyd has written tons of official books for the Forgotten Realms, both for TSR and Wizards of the Coast. His most famous being the God books such as Faiths and Avatars, Demi-Human Deities, and Faiths and Pantheons. He is a huge Forgotten Realms nerd who knows his stuff and keeps his lore consistent with official lore, but just simply adds details where they are missing. Something written by him on the DM's Guild is going to be as close to official canon as possible. It's going to be more detailed and, in my opinion, more interesting than anything Wizards of the Coast puts out anymore, and even Ed Greenwood, the creator of the Forgotten Realms setting, has said that he considers Lord of the End of Everything as canon. Now, with that out of the way, what exactly are the 7 lost gods? Are they actually gods? Well, maybe. Some sources do refer to them as demi-powers or demigods. Now, I know in a lot of real mythologies, a demigod is a half-god, half-mortal, but in Dungeons & Dragons, or at least in the edition that this lore was written, demigods were full-fledged gods. They were just the weakest types of gods, ranking lower than lesser deities in the divine rankings. Other sources refer to them as primordials, which are powerful beings made from entropy and elemental energy. They are similar to gods in their abilities and power, but where gods dwell in the outer planes, primordials are from the inner planes, also known as the elemental planes. Some sources refer to them as elder evils. I'm not exactly sure what an elder evil is, but I believe they're similar to primordials and gods in their power scale, but they usually hail from the far realm or have connections to it. Think aliens and Lovecraftian horror. Also, one of them, Tyranthraxus, is also referred to as a Yugoloth in the novel Azure Bonds, but nowhere else. So, the sources seem to differ greatly on what exactly these creatures are. The point is that they are extremely ancient and powerful beings on the same scale as gods and other similar powers. If I had to pick one to describe them all as, I would pick primordial, as that seems to be what they're referred to more often than not, and that is what they're called in Lord of the End of Everything, which seems to be an unbiased meta view of the history. Legends state that the 7 lost gods submitted to Bane. However, it seems that they submitted to all of the Dead Three, not necessarily just Bane, so I'm not exactly sure of their relationship to Baal and Merkel. Urgun's Description of Darkness, a book written by Urgund about his time spent enslaved in the lower planes, states this about the 7 lost gods and their relationship to Bane. Quote, "And seated foremost in the hall of minor courtiers were the lesser powers, Maram of the Great Spear, Haask, voice of Hargut, Tyranthraxus the Flamesd One, Borem of the Lake of Boiling Mud, and Camnod the Unseen. These 2 fell down and became servants of the great lord Bane." End quote. According to this, those 5 now serve Bane in his Hall of Minor Courtiers, although why the other 2 are not mentioned, I'm not sure. I assume because their names were lost to time, but even if their names are gone, the existence of 2 more lost gods is known, so it's weird that Urgund doesn't mention them. In all the descriptions of Bane's various divine realms, neither the Hall of Minor Courtiers or any of the 7 lost gods are ever mentioned, so I'm not exactly sure where this is or how their servitude to Bane actually works. We also know for a fact that 2 of them, Camnod and Borem, were killed. So either Urgund is wrong or they were somehow resurrected by Bane to be his servants. The Anchor of Chaos. Before I can talk about the 7 lost gods individually, I must first explain the Anchor of Chaos. In the western stretch of the Frozen Forest, which lies far, far north of the Moon Sea between the Anarok Desert and the Great Glacier, lies the Monument of the Ancients, an ancient ziggurat that towers over the ice-covered trees and is made from stone and metals that have never been seen on Toril and are exotic even to the elemental chaos. It was built by an unknown civilization sometime around the First Flowering, specifically around -18,000. We don't know much about this civilization, but they are believed to be the same people who built the Citadel of the Raven, and the horse nomads of the Ride are descendants of the mingling between them and the Ringgarth tribes of Netheril. Deep within the Monument of the Ancients lies an antechamber containing another large pyramid. Located 30 feet from each of its 4 sides are ornate portal-like structures containing the elemental essences of vines, lava, winds, and ice. This is the Anchor of Chaos. See, this area of Toril has a very weak dimensional barrier between it and the elemental chaos, making invasions by these primordials and elementals very easy here. The Anchor of Chaos seals it off and prevents the elemental planes from bleeding into the Prime. This is how the 7 lost gods arrived on Toril. An Emissary experiment, detailed in the 2nd Imask Arcana, involved releasing Borem of the Lake of Boiling Mud and Camnod the Unseen from the Anchor. During the 7 Sigils War, a war between the Netherese crown sorcerers of Ridiuz and the Rilmani armies of Anubis, the Netherese learned of this Emissary experiment and then intentionally damaged the Anchor to release Maram of the Great Spear in -449. They then enslaved Maram with their magic and used him to summon an army of elementals to aid in their war. After the war ended, they banished the elementals, but Maram fled. Bane, Baal, and Merkel, also known as the Dark Three or the Dead Three, were manipulated by Jurgil into killing these 3 primordials using magical god-killing daggers crafted by the crown sorcerers of Ridiuz, absorbing their power in the process. They then craved godhood and began to study the Anchor of Chaos in an attempt to release more primordials they could absorb the power of, which they eventually succeeded in. If you want to know more about the Dead Three's process of summoning and dominating these primordials, I will have a video on the Dead Three coming out shortly that will go in depth on this. Alternatively, you can just check out Lord of the End of Everything on DM's Guild, where most of that information is coming from. Now, let's discuss the 7 lost gods. The first we'll be talking about is Borem of the Lake of Boiling Mud. Borem of the Lake of Boiling Mud is a primordial who was released from the Anchor of Chaos by Emissary artificers. This exact date is unknown, but it would have been sometime between -8000 and -2500 during the Emissary Empire's reign. Borem then took the form of a muddy river, where the modern-day Redwater Lake resides near Westgate. The river was called the River Reza, and the area around it was called the Fetid Fields of Rezamark, and all lay in the domain of the Topaz Dragon, Kisan Rathizar, who ruled from Aklorum, which is where modern-day Westgate is. Locals lived there in exchange for paying tribute to Kisan Rathizar's horde. They made pottery from the mud and sold it to Jumdathan merchants, and their numbers were bolstered by refugees from Low Netheril. In negative 359, Borem became active, causing a great rain to flood the river Reza for 10 days, inundating the land and forming a lake. After the rain stopped, the lake boiled, and the locals believe the great god Borem had manifested. This means the locals already knew about Borem somehow. Since the locals are described as savages and simple potterers, it's unlikely they had discovered the Emissary lore about him, so they probably heard about him through stories passed down, implying he had been active in the past, probably when he was first summoned and relocated down here. Shortly after, the Dark Three arrived in Kisonrathizar's court with the Jathaman dagger, one of the 7 Netherese god-killing daggers I mentioned earlier. They asked for safe passage through his realm in exchange for slaying Borem of the Lake of Boiling Mud on the fields of Rezamark and taking his heart away. They did exactly that, traversing the land as it attacked them with geysers of boiling mud, then finally they breached his home plane and killed him with the Jathaman dagger. They then sailed north to Mezeketh Isle off the coast of Serloon and buried Borem's quagheart beneath the ruins of the Tower of Mezeketh with the Jathaman dagger embedded in it, marking it only by a carved menhir. Next up we have Camnod the Unseen. Camnod the Unseen was the other primordial first released from the Anchor of Chaos through experiments of the Emissary. At some point after this, he went to the windswept plains of the Ride in the Moonsea North, where he became worshipped as a wind god by the horse nomads of the Golden Steppes, specifically the Vayguld tribe. In negative 358, the Dark Three killed him with the Morden dagger, absorbed his power, and buried the dagger-embedded heart under the tallest peak of the Zeph Mountains, which are located at the western end of the Ride. We have no description of what Camnod looked like or what form he took. Maram of the Great Spear. Maram of the Great Spear was first released from the Anchor of Chaos in negative 449 by the 2 Netherese sorcerer kings of Ridiuz, Morden and Urax, in order to enslave him to aid in their war against Anubis. When the war ended in negative 371, his elemental army was banished, but when they tried to banish Maram, he fled, cutting a swath of destruction through Ristal Wood, now known as the Border Forest. He settled in the Ride, joining Camnod and being worshipped by the horse nomads of the Golden Steppes. In negative 357, a coalition of forces consisting of war wizards of Bars being a kingdom between the Galena Mountains and the Ride and was founded by a Netherese arcanist fleeing persecution, artificers from Horeb, another kingdom south of Bars famed for their artificers, the horse nomads of Varm, one of the tribes of the horse nomads of the Golden Steppes located in the Ride, the Knoll Warriors of Flindike, a Knoll settlement now called Frozen Flindike, located in the ruins of a stone giant settlement, the Goliath Hunters of Mount Akoro, located in the Abbey Mountains, and the Gnome Hammers of Forharn, a gnome city beneath the eastern end of the White Peaks, all led by the Dark Three, fought their way to the Monument of the Ancients. Here, using the Scepter of the Sorcerer Kings, Merkel banished Maram back to the elemental plane of Earth, and he was sealed from re-entering the material plane with a Horeb ritual cube. While they were successful, this resulted in tremendous losses for the armies, where only 1 for each 25 soldiers returned home. In 1480, a primordial prince named Pyrrhicus, who was known as the Herald of Maram, took over the Monument of the Ancients and began weakening the dimensional barrier in an attempt to return Maram to Toril, but was ultimately thwarted by a band of adventurers. We have no description of what Maram looked like or what form he took. All I can find in that regard is this line from Lord of the End of Everything. Quote, "The primordial whose spear embodied the axis around which Abir and Toril rotated." End quote. Hargut of the Grey Pestilence. Now, Hargut is not actually listed as one of the 7 lost gods outside of Lord of the End of Everything. In official sources, Haask, voice of Hargut, is listed instead, who isn't a primordial, but a minotaur who summoned Hargut. However, Hargut is said to be mindless, and Haask is the one that grants it intelligence, so it could be argued both ways. Either way, one cannot exist without the other, so let's learn about these two. On the eastern shore of the Moonsea, looming over the mouth of the White River, is the basalt fortress of Ironfang Keep. It was one of 12 fortresses built by fire giants in the realm of Helligheim at the end of the Dawn Age, and is the only one that survived the many battles against dragons. It sat empty for an unknown amount of time, but in -981, the Great Horn Minotaur named Haask declared himself Priest King and claimed it as the capital of his new kingdom, Gronghap. This Minotaur kingdom expanded over the next 600 years to Thar, the Eastern Moon Sea, and the northern highlands of the Vast. When the Dark Three were trying to summon the 7 lost gods in order to slay or absorb their power, they were unable to summon Hargut from the Anchor of Chaos, as he had escaped to the Far Realm long ago. Merkel had discovered Haask was a worshipper of Hargut, and so they released the other 3 primordials, Edranka, Torath, and Tyranthraxus, and unleashed them in the region to cause havoc, hoping Haask would be forced to call upon the Great Pestilence. In the late winter of -350, just as the Dark Three had planned, the released primordial Edranka of the Smouldering Haze led a goblinoid horde of 100,000 from the tortured lands to attack Gronghap. Uttering an incantation in a tongue not spoken since the days of Thunder, Haask summoned Hargut of the Great Pestilence from the Far Realm. He is described as a colossal, worm-like horror with layers and layers of razor-sharp teeth, and his sickly green skin is semi-transparent, revealing red sores beneath the surface. Haask commanded the Great Pestilence to defend the keep and attack the invaders, which it did well, devouring tens of thousands of goblinoids in its humongous maw. When Haask returned triumphantly to his keep, Bane and Merkel were nonchalantly sitting on his giant crafted throne, and Baal appeared behind the Priest King, driving the Urex dagger through his back and into his heart. As the dagger drained his life, his Minotaur guise fell, revealing his true form as a Batrachi doppelganger, the Batrachi being the amphibian creator race that ruled a vast empire in the early histories of Toril. They then offered him an ultimatum. They could keep him alive in exchange for his undying fealty and command of the Great Pestilence. Haask agreed, and then Merkel, using the Scepter of the Sorcerer Kings and uttering 3 arcane syllables, combined Haask and Hargut into one being. Haask became a symbiont, fused to the outer flesh of Hargut, granting the mindless monstrosity a degree of lucidity and intelligence. The Dark Three then imprisoned him beneath Ironfang Keep. The Minotaur kingdom of Gronghap collapsed, and over the centuries a beast cult formed around Ironfang Keep that worshipped Haask, voice of Hargut. They believe one can achieve perfection by magically grafting monstrous limbs and other flesh to their bodies, and so they abduct creatures and perform grisly experiments on them. They have created hundreds of abominations throughout the centuries and released them into the wilderness, Abyxians being just one of many examples. What purpose Haask and his beast cult serve the Dark Three is not known, but having a cult you can easily manipulate into doing what you wish is a very valuable thing to have, especially for a god of tyranny and strife. As of the late 1300s, this cult still occupied Ironfang Keep. If Haask were to be freed, he would immediately seek protection from the gods Malar and Gonadour, and then focus on conquering the Moon Sea and destroying the Church of Bane. Tyranthraxus the Flamesd One. Tyranthraxus has no physical form. He instead possesses the bodies of others in order to enact his goals. Whether he has always existed in this disembodied state or became this way is unknown. While possessing someone, their consciousness is placed into a temporal stasis, and he has access to ESP, magic resistance, and the ability to produce a fiery aura around him at will. If no bodies are around for him to possess, he can exist within a pool of radiance, which are basically pools of raw magic in liquid form. In -356, Tyranthraxus was summoned from the Anchor of Chaos by the Dark Three, who absorbed a portion of his power and bound him to their wills. In an attempt to force Haask to summon Hargut, they forced him to raise an army of Fomorians and destroy the kingdom of Bars after Baal had assassinated their leader. Tyranthraxus then conscripted the remaining warriors of Bars and went on to fight the artificers of Horeb and the horse nomads of the Vane tribe. During this reign of terror, his cloak of flame consumed the body he possessed. Quote, "Freed of its shell, it flew among the men of his army, lighting on each and claiming it." End quote. It was at this point that the last artificer of Horeb, Baron Shot of Castle Vithar, was able to imprison Tyranthraxus in a vial of glowing water, which he sank to the bottom of Lake Longreach. Circa 1240, Tyranthraxus was able to possess the bronze dragon Srasar by having his minions convince him to bathe in a pool of radiance and then raise an army of orcs and hobgoblins to conquer the city of Flan. I'm unsure of how he escaped his prison at the bottom of Lake Longreach, but I assume it has to do with him traveling throughout the pools of radiances. As you'll see in a second, he uses pools of radiance to evade capture often. Anyways, in 1306, Flan is destroyed by dragons and their armies in an event known as Dragon's Run. While it's not explicitly stated anywhere, this seems to be Tyranthraxus in his bronze dragon form leading his monstrous armies with the aid of other dragons, although whether these other dragons were really dragons or other primordials is unknown, but I'll talk more on that in a minute. For 50 years, his minions controlled the city proper, but humans began to recolonize the ruined sections. In 1340, he was defeated and Flan was retaken, but he was able to possess Councilman Porphyrus Cadorna and jump into a pool of radiance which teleported him back to his home plane. 17 years later, using another pool of radiance, he found himself in Mythdraenor and was able to socially dominate many of the fiends there, and learned how to better manipulate the pools. He then used some Moander cultists, members of the Fire Knives Assassin Guild, Zentarum agents, and a renegade red wizard to capture adventurers and inscribe blue tattoos that bound them to his will. He was defeated by these adventurers with the help of Elminster and thought to be dead. Truthfully, he once again retreated through a pool of radiance, teleporting him back to Mythdraenor and keeping him in stasis. In 1489, a meteor strike in the Moonsea region created a new pool of radiance, which he then emerged from and possessed a stone giant shaman. With this body, he dominated the Burning Banner Orc tribe and offered his army's services to the green dragon Vorgan Sherax as part of a ploy to eventually possess the dragon. By 1492, he had succeeded in subtly possessing him without the dragon's knowledge. Like the rest of the Seven Lost Gods, Tyranthraxus is supposed to have been dominated by the Dark Three, or at least Bane. However, after his imprisonment in Lake Longreach, he seems to be enacting his own goals, which is attempting to conquer as much as he can. Whether he has broken out of Bane's control, these were actually the orders of Bane, or if he is simply allowed to act on his own behalf until called upon by Bane is unknown. Torath of the Obsidian Vault. Torath was the last primordial released by the Dark Three in -356. They absorbed a portion of his power and bound him to their will. As part of a scheme to force Haask to summon Hargut in -351, they had Torath burrow underneath Mount Throndor in the eastern Dragonspire Mountains, now known as the West Galena Mountains, where he led a Kuatoa army from Sorath Newsum to conquer Dwagar settlements in the Lost Ways of Sarfil, which is the area beneath modern-day Mulmaster. Eventually, a coven of night hags forced them into icy cold water, which transformed him into a flame-tinged pillar of stone, now known as the Pillar of Fire. The Pillar of Fire is a 200-foot tall stone pillar located underground beneath the southernmost tip of the Galena Mountains. It lies in a massive cavern where a small beach touches an ice-cold lake from which the pillar protrudes from. The pillar is imbued with the element of flame, and those who climb the stairs carved into it and possess rune tiles obtained by defeating the elemental guardians gain the ability to cast Fireball 5 times. Torath being turned into the Pillar of Fire is from Lord of the End of Everything, but according to the Monument of the Ancients article in Dungeon 170 and the first edition Ruins of Adventure book, a ghost who haunts Sokal Keep in the city of Flan has this to say, quote, "The city fell long ago to the unblessed creatures imbued with the might of a magical pool. Chief among these were Tyranthraxus, Edranka, and Torath. With their powers, they ruled and united all else, driving forward to destroy us all. The sage Mantor worked hard to gather record of all these things, but they are lost now, his library overrun." End quote. Imbued with the might of a magical pool would probably refer to the Pools of Radiance, which Tyranthraxus has a strong connection to. And in 1306, Tyranthraxus did conquer Flan, so I'm assuming that is the event he is referring to. According to this ghost, Farron Martinez, he was aided by Torath and Edranka. And according to the accounts of the Dragon's Run, Tyranthraxus was in the form of a bronze dragon, accompanied by other dragons. At this point in time, Torath was the Pillar of Fire, so he must have somehow been able to take on dragon form separate from his main body, or just possessed or convinced existing dragons to aid Tyranthraxus. Either that or the ghost is simply wrong, as I can't find any mention of Torath outside that quote, and what is mentioned in Lord of the End of Everything, which doesn't mention him past -350. In terms of what Torath looked like, or what form he took, it's unsure, but given his title of Obsidian Vault, and obsidian being a volcanic rock, and him being turned into the Pillar of Fire, I assume he had some relationship to the elemental plane of fire. Also, the fact that stepping in ice-cold water turned him into stone also backs that up. The last primordial we'll talk about is Edranka of the Smouldering Haze. Edranka was also summoned by the Dark Three at -359 in order to absorb her power, dominate her, and force her to go on a spree of destruction in the Moonsea region to force Haask to summon Hargut. During the 6 years of this destruction, -356 through -350, Edranka was driven by the Dark Three to assemble the goblin tribes of the Tortured Lands into an army. In -350, she led them to battle against the kingdom of Gronghap, led by Haask. Haask then summoned Hargut of the Grey Pestilence, who then defeated her, driving her away. She was eventually imprisoned in a sphere of ice at the bottom of the Moonsea by the Sea Elves of Alu Tumaro. Like Torath, Edranka was listed by the ghost Farron Martinez as aiding Tyranthraxus in his conquest of Flan, even though she would have been imprisoned during this time. And just like Torath, Edranka is never mentioned anywhere else in the histories of Flan. So either she escaped her prison, or somehow convinced or possessed a dragon to aid Tyranthraxus. Anyways, that is basically everything I could find on the 7 lost gods of Antiquity. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and remember to subscribe for more D&D lore.